Sign it, Terrence. Don't make this embarrassing.
8 years, Lenora.
8 wasted years. I carried you long enough. I'm done.
You're not even worth the air it takes to speak to you. But if you ever need work after this, I could probably find you something. Shine shoes, hold doors. I hear you're good with your hands.
Sign it. Set me free. I promise you, I won't lose a single night of sleep.
The ink on my divorce papers wasn't even dry when the man in the black suit stepped in front of me. I was sitting on the courthouse steps, alone. The September wind off Lake Michigan cut straight through my jacket, but I didn't move. I didn't have anywhere to be. For the first time in 8 years, no one was waiting on me. Not a tenant with a busted radiator, not a wife who needed me gone by morning. Just the sound of traffic and the weight of a morning I had spent the last 8 years trying to avoid. 15 minutes earlier, Lenora had signed her name on the last page inside that courthouse, handed the folder back to her attorney, and walked out without looking at me once. Conrad held the door for her. She took his arm, and just like that, the woman I had loved since we were both nobody, the woman I sold my car for, worked double shifts for, built a life around, disappeared into the back seat of a car that cost more than I made in 3 years. I told myself I was fine. I told myself I had made the right call by not fighting it. I told myself a lot of things sitting on those steps. Then Solomon Price said my full name. Terrence Everett Kincaid. I looked up. He was older, 60s maybe, with a briefcase and the kind of stillness that told you he had delivered serious news before and knew exactly how to carry it. Your grandfather passed 4 days ago, he said. Everett Kincaid, founder of Kincaid Urban Holdings. He held out a folder, thick-bound heavy. He left everything to you. I didn't take it right away. I don't have a grandfather, I said. My father never— Your father left the family before you were born. That part is in the documentation. Solomon set the folder on the step beside me. 43 properties, office towers, apartment complexes, 2 hotels, and land holdings across Chicago, Atlanta, and New York. Total assessed value approximately $1.5 billion. The city kept moving around me like nothing had happened. $1.5 billion. I had $47 in my checking account. Solomon sat down on the step without being invited. There's something else you need to know. The inheritance carries a specific clause. If you had still been married at the moment the transfer activated, your spouse would have held legal grounds to claim a portion of the estate or tie it up in trust proceedings for years. He paused. The divorce was finalized 3 minutes before the transfer window opened. I let that land. 3 minutes. Lenora had walked away from something she would never be able to calculate. There's more, Solomon said. The company is currently facing a hostile takeover. The man behind it has been quietly positioning himself for months, working through intermediaries, pressuring the board, waiting for the estate to appear heirless. I already knew the answer before I asked. Who? Conrad Bellamy. I sat with that for a long moment. The folder in my hands, the ink still drying on those papers. She had chosen Conrad because she believed he was the most powerful man in the room. She had no idea she had just divorced one. Now I had a decision to make. Walk away from all of it or walk straight into the fight they were certain I couldn't win. I picked up the folder. If you want to find out what Terrence did next, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell because this story is just getting started. Let me tell you what kind of man I was before any of this happened. I was the kind of man who kept a spare set of tools in his truck because someone always needed something fixed before sunrise. The kind of man who knew every boiler, every junction box, every cracked section of pipe in a 6-story walk-up on the south side. I had been supervising maintenance at Caldwell Arms for 4 years, a complex that had seen better decades home to about 200 families who couldn't afford better and deserved more than they got. I knew which units had drafty windows, which hallways needed new lighting, which elderly tenants were too proud to call in a work order, but would leave their doors cracked when something was wrong. I had studied construction management for 2 years before my parents died within 8 months of each other and left me with their debts and no safety net. I never finished the degree, but I kept the knowledge: structural load electrical systems, HVAC building codes. I carried it the way some men carry a trade license. It just never paid like one. I was 35 years old, and I made $41,000 a year. That was the full picture. I want to be honest about that because it matters. Not because I'm ashamed of it, I'm not. But because it explains how a woman who once loved me learned to see me as a ceiling instead of a foundation. Lenora and I met when we were both 24. She was working 2 jobs and finishing a communications degree at night. I was doing the same with my coursework. We were the same kind of tired, the same kind of hungry, and we understood each other in the way that people do when they've built everything they have with their own hands and know exactly what it costs. I loved her completely. I want that on record too. When she graduated, I paid the last semester of tuition by selling a 2009 Mustang that had belonged to my father. It wasn't worth much, but it was the only thing of his I still had. I sold it because Lenora was 60 credits away from a degree that could change both our lives, and I believed in her more than I believed in anything sentimental. She graduated, she got hired at a PR firm downtown, then a better firm, then she landed a director-level position at Bellamy Capital handling client relations for one of the largest real estate investment companies in Chicago. That was 3 years ago. She started coming home later. She started talking differently, not in vocabulary but in distance, like she was translating everything she said from a language I wasn't cleared to understand. She stopped asking about the tenants I'd spent my evening helping. She stopped sitting at the kitchen table with me. She started measuring our apartment against the places her colleagues described at dinner parties we were never invited to, together. I noticed all of it. I just didn't say it out loud because I kept thinking it was a phase. Kept thinking she was adjusting to a new world and would find her way back to the one we'd built together. I was wrong about that. Our 8th anniversary fell on a Thursday. I had been putting money aside for 6 weeks. Not much, I couldn't spare much, but enough to buy a bottle of Malbec from the same small wine shop where we'd bought one the night we got engaged. Same label. I had called ahead to make sure they still carried it. I made dinner from scratch. Nothing elaborate, just the things she used to ask for on nights when neither of us had the energy to pretend we were fine. Roasted chicken rice. The kind of simple meal that meant someone had come home thinking about you. I had the table set by 7. By 8:30 I heard the elevator. I heard more than one set of footsteps. Lenora came through the door first. She was wearing the kind of dress that doesn't get purchased on a director's salary, structured, dark something that fit like a decision. Conrad Bellamy came in behind her. 2 attorneys followed and positioned themselves near the door, like they had done this before. Conrad looked around the apartment the way men like him look at things they have already decided aren't worth their time. Lenora placed an envelope on the table next to the wine I had opened. "We need to talk," she said. "Lenora, I've already spoken to an attorney." Her voice was even, prepared. "The papers are in there. I need you to sign them at the courthouse tomorrow morning." I didn't touch the envelope. "It's our anniversary. I know what day it is." "Then tell me what happened." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked at Conrad, and something passed between them that I wasn't meant to see but couldn't miss. "What happened," she said slowly, "is that I spent 8 years waiting for you to become someone. And you didn't. You're still fixing other people's buildings. You're still coming home with grease on your hands and nothing in your account. I am not the same woman I was when we met, and I can't keep pretending that this," she gestured at the apartment, at the table, at me, "is enough." "I paid for your degree," I said. "I sold my father's car." "And I'm grateful. But gratitude doesn't make a future." She crossed her arms. "Conrad has offered me something you never could. I'm not going to apologize for choosing it." Conrad had not spoken yet. He stood slightly behind her with his hands in his jacket pockets, watching me the way someone watches a transaction they have already closed. One of the attorneys stepped forward and placed a second copy of the documents on the table. Lenora kept going. She wanted the apartment. She wanted the car, the one I was still making payments on. She wanted the joint savings account, which held $4,000 I had been setting aside for a plumbing certification course. She gave me 48 hours to take my belongings and go. I sat down. I thought about the Mustang. I thought about every night shift I had picked up so she could move us to a neighborhood with better transit. I thought about the way she used to fall asleep with her head against my shoulder on the couch when we were too tired to make it to the bedroom, and how certain I had been in those moments that we were going to be fine. I could have fought it. I could have filed a response, documented the affair, contested the asset division, and dragged the whole thing into a deposition where Conrad Bellamy's name would be entered into the public record. I had grounds. I had enough. But fighting meant months of hearings and attorney fees I couldn't carry, and at the end of it, she still wouldn't be the woman I had married. That woman had left before tonight. I just hadn't been told the date. I told her I would sign in the morning. Conrad placed a hand briefly on her shoulder. She smiled, not at me, just into the room, the way someone smiles when they have gotten what they came for. I went to the bedroom and took the only two things that belonged to me without question. My father's toolbox and a folder of old documents I had found in a storage unit after he died. Papers with the name Kincaid on them. I had never known what they meant. I had carried them anyway, the way you carry something you can't explain but aren't ready to let go of. I walked out the front door. The next morning, I was at the courthouse by 8. The filing took less than an hour. My court-appointed attorney walked me through the final submission without ceremony. Lenora arrived with her team signed where required and left without acknowledging me once. Conrad held the elevator for her on the way out. I walked back outside and sat on the front steps. 8 years. 47 minutes of paperwork. I was still sitting there when Solomon Price came down the sidewalk and called me by a name I had never heard anyone use in full. I have already told you what he said. The inheritance. The $1.5 billion. The clause that would have entitled a spouse to contest the transfer, and the 3 minutes that stood between Lenora and a claim she would never be able to file now. But what I haven't told you is what I felt in that moment. Not shock. Not satisfaction. Something quieter than both. I thought about the families at Caldwell Arms, the woman on the 3rd floor who used her oven for warmth all winter because the heat had been out for months and no one came. The family on the 5th floor with the leaking ceiling that management kept pushing back because the repair would cut into the quarterly report. I thought about what a man with real power could do if he actually understood what those buildings felt like from the inside. I told Solomon I needed 1 day. He handed me the folder, gave me his card, and said he would be available whenever I was ready. I sat there a while longer. Then I stood, tucked the folder under my arm next to my father's, and walked to my truck. I had already made my decision before I reached the parking lot. I did not go to the board meeting first. I called Solomon that evening and told him I wanted to see the properties before I walked into any room with any title attached to my name. He paused on the line, then said he would arrange it. The next morning, he drove me to a Kincaid Urban Holdings complex on the west side. 12 stories, 230 units. One of the largest residential buildings in the portfolio. From the outside, it looked maintained. Clean facade, working signage, a recently repainted entrance. I asked to see the mechanical room. The building supervisor led me down to the basement without asking questions. Maintenance workers recognize each other. We speak the same language. The boiler room told me everything within 4 minutes. 2 of the 3 primary heating units were offline. The bypass valves were wrapped in duct tape that had been there long enough to yellow and crack. Someone had rerouted the system to keep a narrow band of units functional, specifically the units on floors 8 through 12, which were the highest rent floors. The families on the lower floors, the ones paying the least, had been without consistent heat for at least 6 weeks. The building supervisor confirmed it quietly. He said work orders had been filed. He said they kept getting pushed back. He said 2 children on the second floor had been treated for respiratory infections their mother believed were related to the cold. I stood in that boiler room for a long time. Then I told him repairs would begin within the week and walked back upstairs. "Someone's been cutting maintenance costs to clean up the financials," I said to Solomon as we pulled away. "They want the quarterly reports to look good before the sale goes through. They don't care what it costs the people living here." Solomon nodded. "Several board members have been cooperating with Bellamy's team. They stand to receive significant compensation if the acquisition closes." "How many?" "Enough to push a vote." I told Solomon to take me to the board meeting. I walked in wearing what I had worn to the courthouse: dark work pants, a clean shirt, a canvas jacket. I had not bought a suit. I walked in looking like myself. The conference room was on the 42nd floor of a downtown Tower Kincaid property, though the men inside seemed to have forgotten that. 11 board members sat around a long table, 3 attorneys lined the wall, and a presentation was already in progress on the screen at the far end. Conrad Bellamy stood at the front of the room. He had a slide deck, charts, projections, acquisition terms. He was proposing to purchase Kincaid Urban Holdings at a valuation 40% below the independent assessment Solomon had shown me the night before. His plan included the immediate sale of 4 lower-income residential buildings, cleared for luxury redevelopment, and the elimination of the company's affordable housing commitments. Lenora was seated to his right, a Bellamy Capital lanyard around her neck, a notepad open in front of her. She was in the room as his communications advisor for the deal. When I came through the door, one of the board members frowned and looked toward the assistant near the entrance. "Is there a maintenance issue?" he asked. Conrad turned. He saw me, and something moved across his face, not surprise, more like mild inconvenience. Lenora set her pen down. "Security," she said evenly. "There's someone in here who doesn't belong." "He belongs more than anyone in this room." Solomon stepped in behind me. He set his briefcase on the table and removed a notarized copy of Everett Kincaid's will, the title transfer documentation, and a letter from the estate attorney confirming succession. He slid the documents to the board chair. "Terrence Everett Kincaid is the sole heir of Everett Kincaid's estate and the controlling shareholder of Kincaid Urban Holdings as of 9:47 yesterday morning. The transfer is complete and legally binding. Any agreement entered into without his authorization from that moment forward is void." The room went quiet. Conrad did not look at the documents. He looked at me. I walked to the far end of the table, to the chair with a small brass nameplate in front of it. Someone had placed a Bellamy Capital folder on the seat. I picked it up, set it on the floor, and sat down. "Mr. Bellamy," I said, "the acquisition is off the table. Effective immediately, all contracts between Kincaid Urban Holdings and Bellamy Capital are terminated. Anyone on this board who facilitated unauthorized access to company financials will be hearing from our legal team by end of week." Conrad smiled. The smile of a man who had been in difficult rooms before and knew how to wait them out. "You have no idea what you've walked into," he said. "I walked into a building this morning where children were sleeping in coats because someone cut the heating budget to make your spreadsheet look better." I looked around the table. "I also walked into a company that still has real value if the people running it stop trying to sell it to the wrong man." I turned back to Conrad. "You're done here. I'd like you to leave." He left. Slowly, deliberately, making sure the room understood he was choosing to go. Lenora gathered her things without looking at me. At the door, she stopped. "You have no idea how to run a company," she said. "I know how to fix what's broken," I said. "That's where I'll start." She left. I ordered the emergency heating repairs before the meeting was over. Conrad's response came within 72 hours. Lenora appeared on a local news broadcast, composed, tearful at the right moments. She told a story I barely recognized. She said I had hidden my wealth throughout our marriage. She said she had worked herself to exhaustion to support a husband who was secretly worth hundreds of millions while pretending to struggle. She said the timing of the divorce finalized minutes before the inheritance became active was not coincidence. It was calculation. She produced text messages, screenshots partially cropped, arranged to suggest I had received communication about the inheritance months before Everett died. She filed a civil lawsuit demanding $600 million, citing fraud and deliberate concealment of marital assets. Conrad used the lawsuit to pressure the banks. Several of Kincaid Urban Holdings' lending partners placed credit lines under review. 2 institutional investors quietly withdrew. Board members who had not been suspended began calling Solomon, asking whether the company could survive a prolonged legal battle. I understood what Conrad was doing. The lawsuit was not the point. The lawsuit was pressure, designed to destabilize the company, shake the board's confidence, and create enough uncertainty that the cleanest solution seemed to be accepting his offer. I did not respond publicly. I did not call a press conference or appear on the same broadcast Lenora had used. Instead, I sat down with Solomon and Jamila Rhodes, our chief financial officer, a precise, methodical woman who had worked for the company 9 years and had watched Conrad's team circle the portfolio for months with visible unease. Jamila was the first board member to stand in my corner without being asked. She did it because she had read the numbers and understood what the sale would actually mean, not just for the company, but for the people whose rent checks kept the lights on. We went through every document Lenora had submitted to the court. Every text message. Every timestamp. Something didn't line up. I just needed someone to find what it was. The forgery took Damon Sutter 11 days to confirm. Damon ran internal security and investigations for the company, a position Everett had created after a fraud incident years earlier. He was quiet, careful, and extremely good at finding things people believed were buried. The documents Lenora had submitted, the ones supposedly proving I had known about the inheritance for 6 months, had been constructed using signatures lifted from maintenance contracts I had signed at Caldwell Arms over the past 3 years. Routine work orders, repair authorizations, documents I had signed dozens of times without a second thought. Lenora had kept copies. She had taken photographs of those contracts during a visit to my workplace roughly 2 years earlier. A visit I remembered clearly because she had stopped by unannounced and said she wanted to see where I spent my days. I had shown her around. I had thought it meant she was trying to reconnect. She had been collecting my signature. Damon also recovered security footage from the hallway outside Lenora's office at Bellamy Capital. A camera she had not known covered that angle. The footage showed her handing a folder of documents to one of Conrad's attorneys on a Tuesday afternoon, 6 weeks before she filed for divorce. Before I could bring any of it forward, Conrad moved. He contacted board members individually over 2 days, presenting what he called a rescue package, an emergency loan to stabilize the company's credit position during the lawsuit, contingent on Bellamy Capital being granted operational oversight for 90 days. 4 board members agreed. The emergency session was called for a Thursday morning. I walked into that meeting knowing what the vote was going to be. Lenora was there again. This time, the diamond on her left hand was new large positioned where a camera would find it. She and Conrad had announced their engagement to press contacts the night before. Conrad presented his proposal, calm though well prepared. He had been doing this for 30 years. When the vote came, it went against me. 7-4. My operational authority was suspended for 30 days. My personal accounts tied to the estate were frozen by court order. Conrad was formally appointed restructuring advisor. Before the session ended, Lenora looked across the table at me. "You should take the settlement, Terrence." Her voice was quiet, almost kind, the way a closing door can be quiet and still be a door closing. "Take what they're offering and walk away. This was never really your world." Conrad placed his hand over hers on the table. I said nothing. 2 hours later, security walked me out of the building I legally owned. Outside, reporters were waiting. Cameras. Questions about whether I intended to admit to defrauding my ex-wife. I kept walking. I drove back to Caldwell Arms. I needed to think in a place that made sense to me. In the old mechanical room, I sat on an overturned crate next to the boiler units my crew had finished repairing 2 weeks earlier. The room was warm now. That was something. My father's toolbox was in the back of my truck. Inside it, beneath a layer of wrenches and electrical tape, was a folder of handwritten notes pages my father had kept during a construction inspection he had worked on years earlier. The project was Bellamy Tower. My father had been brought in as a third-party structural reviewer. His notes were dense, technical, precise, the kind of documentation a man keeps when he suspects something is wrong and wants a record. He had flagged discrepancies in the material specifications. Load-bearing components rated below the listed grade. Subcontractor invoices that didn't align with the work actually performed. A pattern of payments routed through 2 holding companies that appeared to exist for no other purpose. He had never filed a formal report. I didn't know why. Maybe he was pressured. Maybe he thought no one would listen. He had kept the notes anyway. I read through them twice in that boiler room. Then I called Solomon. I need to know everything about how Bellamy Capital finances its construction projects, I said, going back 15 years. Solomon was quiet for a moment. You're not just trying to save the company. No, I said. I'm going to take his. We worked in 3 locations simultaneously for the next 19 days. Solomon operated out of his firm's office, coordinating with the estate's legal team and managing the court filings. Jamila worked from her home, running financial forensics on Bellamy Capital's public disclosures and cross-referencing them against the construction records my father had documented. Damon ran his investigation from a secure server room in the Kincaid building, one Conrad's team had not yet accessed, because Damon had quietly reclassified it as a safety infrastructure facility the day after the board vote. I worked from my truck. My father's notes spread across the passenger seat. What my father had found was a thread. What Damon found when he pulled it was a full unraveling. Conrad Bellamy had built his empire using a method that was not complicated, it was simply patient. He would establish a legitimate construction project, obtain financing based on accurate projections, then route a portion of the contract work through subsidiary companies he controlled. Those subsidiaries would invoice the project at inflated rates for materials and labor. The difference between the real cost and the build cost moved through a series of accounts and landed somewhere that never appeared on a public balance sheet. He had done this on 14 projects across 3 states. The total amount skimmed from construction budgets over 30 years exceeded $70 million. But the money itself was not the most dangerous part of what we found. The dangerous part was the collateral. Conrad's current lending arrangements, the ones that gave Bellamy Capital its operating power, the ones he had used to pressure Kincaid's banking partners, were secured against the appraised value of his properties. But several of those appraisals had been conducted by a firm that shared a registered agent with one of Conrad's shell companies. He had borrowed enormous sums of money against buildings whose value he had helped inflate. If those appraisals were challenged and revised downward, the loan-to-value ratios would collapse. The banks would call the notes. And Conrad Bellamy, the man who had told me men like me don't own things, would not be able to meet his obligations. Jamila confirmed the numbers 3 times before she called me. If we bring this to the right people simultaneously, she said, he won't have time to move assets or negotiate a soft landing. It has to happen in one day, all of it. The board presentation, the banking contacts, and the federal disclosure, same morning. Can we do that? I've already drafted the filing, she said. I've been drafting it for a week. I was waiting to see if you'd ask. I told her to be ready for Thursday. The board had scheduled its vote on the sale of 3 residential properties for that same Thursday morning. Under Conrad's oversight, the transactions had been fast-tracked. The kind of speed that only happens when someone wants something done before anyone looks too closely. Those 3 buildings housed 412 families. I arrived at 7:45. I used the 45 minutes to walk the lobby, ride the elevator to the top floor and back, and stand for a moment on the 4th floor where the paint was new and the overhead light had just been replaced. My crew had done that work 3 weeks ago, before the board suspended me. I had authorized a full maintenance review of every residential property in the portfolio. Most repairs were already complete. Conrad had not ordered them stopped. I think he had not noticed them. He was focused on the transaction, not the buildings. That was the difference between us. At 9:03, I walked into the conference room. Conrad's people were on their feet immediately. One reached for the phone to call building security. "That won't be necessary." Solomon stepped in beside me and placed a document in front of the board chair. The Cook County Circuit Court issued an emergency order at 8:15 this morning, vacating the suspension of Terrence Kincaid's operational authority on the basis of newly submitted evidence of document fraud. The order is effective immediately. The room shifted. Conrad stood at the front, controlled as always. "Whatever you think you have," he said, "it won't hold." "I have your construction records going back to 2009, I said. "I have wire transfer documentation for 14 projects. I have the appraisal reports cross-referenced against the registered agent filings for the firms that produce them. And I have security footage of Lenora handing a folder of fraudulently prepared documents to your attorney 6 weeks before she filed for divorce." I nodded to Damon, who connected his laptop to the room's display system. What followed was 22 minutes of documentation. The board members who had voted against me sat very still. The 2 attorneys Conrad had brought watched the screen, then watched each other. One of them quietly closed his notepad. Representatives from 3 of Kincaid's banking partners were present. Jamila had arranged their attendance the day before under the cover of a routine quarterly review. They watched the financial analysis without speaking. One of them stepped into the hallway at the 14-minute mark and made a phone call. I knew what that call was about. When the presentation ended, I stood. "Conrad has offered this board a rescue loan contingent on operational control. What he did not disclose is that the capital behind that loan is secured by fraudulently appraised assets. If you accept his offer, you tie this company to a financial structure that is about to come apart." I looked around the table. "I am asking this board to reject the sale, restore full governance, and allow the legal process to run its course. The buildings stay, the families stay, and we move forward." The board chair called for a recess. It lasted 9 minutes. When they came back, the vote was 8-3 in my favor. By noon, the banks had begun reviewing Bellamy Capital's loan collateral. By 2 in the afternoon, 2 of the largest notes had been formally called. By the time the markets closed, the assessed value of Conrad's portfolio had been placed under independent review, and his primary line of operating credit was frozen. Through Kincaid Urban Holdings Investment Fund, a position Jamila had built quietly over the preceding 2 weeks, using assets that had not been frozen, we had purchased a significant portion of Bellamy Capital's outstanding debt at a steep discount. Distressed debt, the kind that trades hands when creditors start looking for any exit. We held the notes. Conrad had no real leverage remaining. The settlement negotiations lasted 4 days. He transferred Bellamy Tower and 7 additional properties as part of the debt resolution. The man who had told me men like me don't own things signed documents that gave me his. Conrad was arrested on a Tuesday morning 6 weeks later. Federal charges: wire fraud, conspiracy, financial statement fraud. When his assets were frozen, he issued a statement through his legal team clarifying that Lenora had acted independently in her role at Bellamy Capital and that he had no knowledge of the document fabrication scheme. He did not mention the engagement. The ring, it turned out, had been purchased using funds from an account federal investigators had already flagged. Lenora lost her position at Bellamy Capital the day the arrest was announced. The civil lawsuit she had filed against me was formally withdrawn 2 weeks later, after Damon's footage was submitted to the court and her own attorney advised her of where things stood. I did not reach out to her. I made no public statement about her role. I let the legal process do what it was designed to do. She came to me. It was a Wednesday afternoon about 3 weeks after Conrad's arrest. My assistant told me a woman was in the lobby without an appointment. I knew before I got the description. She was wearing a gray cardigan I recognized from years ago, something she had owned before the Bellamy Capital job, before the wardrobe that came with that life. No jewelry, hair pulled back simply. She looked like the woman I had married, and I want to be honest, that was the hardest part. Not anger, not satisfaction, just the quiet ache of recognizing someone you once knew completely. I had her shown in. She sat across from me and was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Do you remember that first apartment on Paulina Street? The heat went out in January, and we spent 3 nights in the living room with the oven on because we couldn't afford an emergency call?" I remembered. "You fixed it yourself," she said. "Took you half a night. And when you were done, you came back to the couch and didn't say anything about it. You just pulled the blanket over both of us." She folded her hands in her lap. "I told myself for a long time that I outgrew you, that I was just being honest about what I needed." She looked at her hands. "Conrad told me the strong thing to do was to stop settling, and I believed him because I wanted to." A long pause. "He was using me. I think I knew that. I chose not to look at it." "I know," I said. "I'm not asking you to forgive me." Her voice was steady but thin. "I'm not here for that. I just needed you to know that I understand now what I had and what I threw away." I reached into the desk drawer and placed a copy of the divorce papers on the surface between us. Not to wound her. She had signed them herself and she knew what they meant. I placed them there because I wanted us both to be clear about where we were standing. "You didn't leave a poor man," I said. "You left the only person who ever loved you without keeping score. Who you were, what you had, what you might become, none of it was part of the calculation for me. It never was." I kept my voice even. "I hope someday you find someone who does the same. But that's not something I can give you anymore." She didn't argue. She didn't ask for a position in the company. She nodded once the way a person does when they've received the answer they already knew was coming, and had come anyway, because they needed to hear it said out loud. She stood, smoothed her cardigan. At the door, she paused for just a moment. Then she walked out. I sat at the desk for a long time after that. Not angry, not relieved, just still. Terrence officially assumed the chairmanship of Kincaid Urban Holdings on a Monday morning in November, 6 months after Solomon had handed him a folder on the courthouse steps. Jamila Rhodes was appointed Chief Executive Officer. Her first initiative was a full operational audit of every property in the portfolio, not for sale preparation, but for habitability. Every deferred repair, every outstanding work order, every system that had been allowed to degrade while someone cleaned up a quarterly report. Damon established an independent oversight division with direct reporting authority to the board, specifically designed to prevent the kind of internal collusion that had merely handed the company to Conrad Bellamy. The 3 residential buildings Conrad had scheduled for sale remained in the portfolio. Terrence authorized a $22 million renovation program across all 3. New heating system structural repairs, updated electrical elevator overhauls. Bellamy Tower was renamed. The new sign went up on a Thursday, Kincaid Community Center. The building was being converted into a mixed-use facility, affordable housing on the upper floors, job training and financial literacy programs at street level, with a dedicated wing for the Everett Kincaid Foundation. The foundation offered housing assistance for low-income families and scholarships for working adults pursuing degrees in construction management architecture and real estate operations. It was named after a man I had never met in person, but whose values I had been living without knowing where they came from. Terrence kept his old maintenance uniform in the office. hung on a hook behind the door, not framed, not displayed, just there, the way a tool stays within reach. One morning the following spring, he drove back to Caldwell Arms alone. No security, no car service. He parked in the same spot he had used for 4 years and walked to the mechanical room, where a crew was midway through installing an updated HVAC system. He spent the morning working alongside them. A young technician, 2 years into the trade, watched him work for a while and then asked, "You really own all of this?" "The company owns it," Terrence said. "I run the company." "Same thing." "Not really." He tightened a fitting and checked the pressure gauge. "Owning a building is just paperwork. Freight elevator and the main lobby and the front door he had walked through 1,000 times. Chicago's skyline sat steady against the morning. Somewhere in that skyline where Bellamy Tower used to cast its particular shadow, the new signage on Kincaid Community Center caught the light. Lenora had believed she was leaving a man with no future. She couldn't see that the future was already there, built into the way he worked, the way he thought, the way he understood what a building was actually worth and who it was worth it to. The inheritance didn't create that. It only gave the rest of the world something large enough to see it through. There are people in your life right now who show up quietly, who fix things without asking for recognition, who give without keeping score, who stay steady when staying isn't easy. This story is a reminder not to measure their worth by what's in their account or what their job title says. Because by the time the world finally sees what they were always carrying, you may have already signed your name on the line that let them go. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. The next story is already waiting.